morning everyone. Today we would be discussing about the ethical consideration while you are planning a research. In this topic, basically we would be studying about the research and the need for ethics, the history and code of ethics, the ethical principles of research, informed consent process and informed consent document. And in the end we would be discussing about the patient information sheet and the various elements which are needed, and briefly we will touch upon the special situations that we are facing in terms of COVID and other aspects related to the medical research. Now, why research need ethics? Why do I need to worry about research ethics? Research ethics isn't just or even mostly about bad people doing bad things. It's also about imperfect people doing imperfect things for a variety of reasons. Socially acceptable practices we later deem wrong. Accident can happen during research. And every research has some inherent risk and possibilities of harm or inconvenience to participants or the community at large. Second World War. In 1940, German medical practitioners conduct experiments on human participants without their consent and exposes them to grave risk of death and permanent impairment. Victims of Nazi medical experiments were subjected to cold immersion experiment, depressurization experiments, and deliberately infected with tuberculosis and other infective agents to test for various antimicrobial agents on them. Studies conducted by a Nazi doctor who used convicts for human experimentation stunned the whole world, which led to the formulation of Nuremberg Code to prevent recurrence of such episodes in future. It is the first international code for ethics in clinical research, laying down the guidelines for research on human subjects and made the voluntary consent absolute essential. Within months after the Nuremberg trial, the World Medical Association was established on 17 September 1947 and adopted three important declarations related to medical ethics. The Declaration of Geneva in 1948, which stated that the health of my patient will be my first consideration. This was followed by the International Code of Medical Ethics that stated that a physician shall act in the best interest of the patient when providing medical care. And then in 1964, for the first time, related to the medical research, it was the Declaration of Helsinki, which stated that it is the duty of the physician to promote and safeguard the health of patients, including those who are involved in medical research. It also further added that well-being of the individual subject must take precedence over all other interests, and it was the first time that the concept of institutional ethics committee was also introduced. Another important landmark in history of medical ethics was the Tuskegee syphilis study that was conducted in Alabama among 600 black African American population. The experiment started in 1932, at that time when there was no known treatment for syphilis. After being recruited by the promise of free medical care, 600 men originally were enrolled and were monitored by the health workers, but were only given placebo, despite the fact that penicillin became the recommended treatment for syphilis in 1947. In order to track the disease full progression, researchers provided no effective treatment as the men died, went blind or insane, or experienced other severe health-related problems due to untreated syphilis. The experiment formed the basis of the Belmont Report, which was placed on 1978 as the ethical principles and guidelines for the protection of human research. It identified three basic ethical principles: the respect for the person, that is the autonomy, the beneficence and the justice. These were the three core elements that was first stated by the Belmont Report. And again, it also re-emphasized the establishment of institutional review board or the institutional ethics committee. So from all these mistakes that we have learned in medical research, we have now four important basic ethical principles, namely the autonomy, which states the right of an individual to make his or her own choice; justice, a concept that emphasizes fairness and equality among individuals; beneficence, the principle of acting with the best interest of others in mind; non-maleficence, the principle that above all do no harm, as it's stated by the Hippocrates Oath. Now we would be discussing about the informed consent process, and we recall our 6 faithful friends: why, what, where, when, who and how. So what is informed consent, why we need it, where is it needed, when to obtain it, who can provide a valid informed consent, and how to obtain it. So these 6 questions will answer comprehensively about the informed consent. First question is, what is informed consent? Informed consent is a continuous process. It is important to highlight that it is a continuous process. It's not a one-time thing that you have taken a consent and it would be there throughout. No. So it's a continuous process of providing relevant information to the potential participant, ensuring that the information is easily comprehended by the participant, and at the same time ensuring that the participant is competent, means ensuring competence of the individual, and also assuring the voluntariness of participation. So these are the 4 things: that you provide information, ensure that it has been understood by the patient, and thirdly, the patient should be competent enough to say yes or no, and that acceptance or denial has to be voluntary and not under any force or duress. Now the other question is, why we need consent. I'm sure by going through the history now we have understood the importance of concept and the individual autonomy. So informed consent protects the individual's freedom of choice and respects the individual's autonomy. Now the next question is, where do we need informed consent? The researcher must obtain voluntary written informed consent from the prospective participant for every biomedical and health research that involves human participants. There is no exception in that. Now, when to obtain informed consent? So it is essential that the researcher should administer consent before initiating any study related procedures that involves the human participants. It's not like that you are taking the patient for a procedure and meanwhile asking him or taking his consent. No, it should be obtained before initiating any study related procedure or drawing any blood or asking any question pertaining to the research from the human participant. Now, next question is, who can give us a valid informed consent? A valid consent can be obtained from a participant who has a capacity to understand the proposed research, who is able to make an informed decision on whether or not to be enrolled in the study or not, and who can convey his or her decision to the researcher in order to give this consent. And for those who is not capable of giving this valid informed consent, the consent may be taken from their legal authorized representative or guardians, for example in children. Now, how to obtain a valid informed consent? The consent should be given voluntarily by the participant, and it should never be obtained under duress or coercion of any sort, or by offering any undue inducements. Now, the document which is used to provide the relevant research related information to the prospective participant and to take their signatures in the form of a written informed consent, that document is known as informed consent document, and it has 2 parts. One is the patient or the participant information sheet, and the other is informed consent form. The patient information sheet, or the PIS, is the information on known facts about the research which has relevance to the participation. And the informed consent form is where the participant or the patient acknowledges that he or she has understood the information provided to him or her under the PIS and is volunteering to be included in that research. The patient or the participant information sheet should provide detailed information about the research in the language the participant is able to understand. The language should be scientifically accurate, simple and commonly used. Mostly we suggest to have bilingual patient information sheet and consent form. One would be in English and other would be in the local language. Like in our setup, we would recommend you to have a Hindi PIS as well. Then it is also important that the content that we are telling to the participant and the PIS should be sensitive to the social and the cultural context of the participant. The elements that should be there in any patient information sheet. The patient information sheet typically should start with your study title and followed by your identity and the identity of your research team with their affiliation and addresses, and then there should be an invitation to the prospective participant to be part of the study, and it should clearly mention that it is a research study. Thereafter, you explain the purpose, why you are doing the study. The purpose of research is not merely the aim or the objective of the research that you are having. It is why why you thought of doing the study. Then in the PIS, you describe the methodology of research in a very simple language that could be understood by a layperson. You describe the expected duration of the participants and the number of participants that would be enrolled and the type of data that would be collected, whether the data would only be descriptive data or you would also be collecting the blood samples of the patient. Then if there is any benefit to the participant in this research or any foreseeable risk or discomfort that might happen. And then there should be a statement about the confidentiality of the record or the data that has been collected from the participants. You should also clarify if there is any payment or reimbursement that would be given to the participant in the study, and there should be a statement on if there would be a free treatment or any compensation would be provided to the participant if he or she had a research related injury or harm. And finally, there has to be a statement stating that the freedom of the individual to participate and or withdraw from the research at any time without penalty or loss of benefit to which the participant would otherwise be entitled. So these are the essential component of the PIS. These are not exhaustive. The elements would be added depending on the type of research you are conducting. There could be certain special situations, like for example, the researcher can apply to the ethics committee for a waiver of consent if the research involves less than minimum risk to the participant and the waiver will not adversely affect the right and welfare of the participant. For example, retrospective study if you're doing where the participants are de-identified and cannot be contacted for consent, or research on anonymized blood samples or data, or research of data that is available in the public domain. But thing is that you have to request the EC to give a waiver, and it is at the discretion of the EC if they feel that this will not adversely affect the right and welfare of the participants, then the waiver might be given. Other thing is that there could be certain vulnerable persons. These are those individuals who are relatively or absolutely incapable of protecting their own interests because of personal disability, social injustice, lack of power, or understanding or ability to communicate is compromised, or they are in certain situation that prevents them from doing so. So researchers must have additional safeguards in place for the protection of such population if they are to be included in the study. Message is very simple. Plan your research protocol keeping in mind the four fundamental ethical principles that we have discussed, right? Autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. The informed consent, remember, is a continuous process of collaborative communication and decision making. It's not merely signing in a form at a time. Secondly, a comprehensive informed consent document which contains a PIS and informed consent form in a scientific, accurate, simple, local language. Means preferably a bilingual. We would ask you to submit a bilingual PIS in English as well as its Hindi version, and it is mandatory for any biomedical research. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any query regarding this presentation, you can send me that to my email address proteesh@gmail.com. Thank you very much.